Hello, friends. How are you all? I hope you are well. My name is Usman, and I narrate the horror stories sent by you. You must have guessed today's story from the title and thumbnail. So these stories, all three about black magic, are exciting. The first one was shared anonymously, the second one by Zakir, and the third by Subhan. Let's listen to their stories in their own words. Hello there. I've been an old subscriber of yours since you had just 500 subscribers. Due to some complications, I cannot share my name here. I want to share a story in which the main character is my father. To take revenge on him, black magic was done on him and then on me. This incident happened in 1999 when my father was doing his master's degree in accounts. He was living in his small house in Rawalpindi. We used to live there with my brother, and now we are settled in Rawalpindi. At that time, my father had gone to his village to celebrate Eid, which is an hour-and-a-half drive from Talagang in Chakwal district. When my father reached the village, everything was set for Eid. However, 2 days before Eid, my grandfather suddenly passed away due to a heart attack. Let me tell you that a month before my grandfather's death, his younger sister, who was 21 years old and whom my grandfather loved dearly, had also died. My grandfather was very worried about this, and then he, too, passed away. My father couldn't bear the shock, and his blood pressure shot up. He became unconscious. When the doctor checked, there was only a 5-point gap between the upper and lower BP digits. The doctor immediately sent him to Rawalpindi. When my father was admitted to the hospital, it was discovered that his blood pressure had affected his kidneys, leading to kidney failure. Dialysis continued for some time, and then, after a transplant, he completely recovered. But before his kidney failure, my father was engaged to a relative's daughter, who left him during this difficult time and broke off the engagement. After my father recovered, he got a job in a multinational company, bought a car, and returned to normal life. In 2002, my father married my mother, and I was born in 2004. Then, in 2006, when I was 2 years old, my father began to have health issues again. At that time, I was a child and wasn't aware of what was happening, but my mother told me that my father's health had deteriorated severely. He was taken to a hospital in Islamabad, where it was found that his kidney transplant had failed after just a year. My mother was very young, and everyone advised her to leave him, but she did not. However, during my father's illness, there was a lot of harassment from my grandmother towards my mother. My grandmother, who was my mother's mother-in-law, used to tell my father's brothers that my mother was to blame for the situation. My mother tolerated this hardship. My father was critically ill and on the brink of death. During this period, he underwent dialysis for 6 months, but there was no medical issue detected. My father's elder brother, my uncle, who had also recently died due to black magic while working in Saudi Arabia, had a Bengali friend who was well versed in identifying who performed the magic and why. My uncle sought his help, and it was revealed that it was my father's previous fiancé's family who had done all this through a woman who had caught a live frog, put some cursed amulets in its mouth, tied it up, and after floating it in a pond, killed it. This act caused irreversible damage, and in 2006, after 6 months of dialysis, my father underwent a second transplant, after which he completely recovered. By 2021, my father had settled down, bought a new car in January, and received a promotion. We were all very happy, but it was a mistake to share this happiness with others. The news spread, and soon after, on July 30th, after I had completed my matriculation exams, my health began to deteriorate. I became weak, struggled to walk, and experienced shortness of breath. Within a month, my condition worsened, and I was confined to my home. No treatment or medicine seemed to have any effect. I became extremely weak, and my father took me to a famous international hospital in Islamabad. There, it was revealed that my kidneys had completely failed, and I, too, had to start dialysis. I was admitted for about 18 days. I'm not going to tell you every detail, otherwise, the story would become too long. Well, I had dialysis every day, but just like my father, my kidneys were also destroyed by black magic to take revenge on him. At that time, I was 17 years old and had just started to understand what was happening. I was very depressed and often had dreams. Not all dreams, but one, in particular, stands out. I dreamed of a large circular stream with a fire burning in the middle and darkness all around. 3 tall, shadowy figures circled me, blowing something on me after reciting it. I was terrified. After this dream, my father called a scholar friend who came to our house and checked everything. he discovered that we had been specifically targeted with strong black magic, which was not only affecting me but also causing a lot of tension between my parents. The scholar treated me for a long time, and eventually, the symptoms subsided. I continued dialysis for 2 years, and recently, in April 2023, I had a transplant. I am now fine. However, during the first 3 months after the transplant, I was isolated in a separate room at home, as the doctor had advised. During this time, I often felt as if someone was sitting on my bed, and I would sometimes hear my name being called. I didn't tell my family about these experiences at first, but one day I felt as if someone was secretly watching me from the door. I got angry and shouted, "Who is there? Whatever it is, get lost." After reciting some verses, the presence disappeared. I told my father about this, and he discussed it with the scholar, who explained that those who had cast the spell on me were unhappy that I had recovered, which was why all these things were happening. The scholar gave me a talisman to drink and use, and since then, alhamdulillah, nothing similar has happened. However, I am now a kidney patient for life, but with Allah's permission, I am content. I hope you will share my story on your channel. Whoever you are, I sympathize with you deeply. May Allah bless you with good health and all the happiness in this world and the hereafter. I won't keep saying it again and again, like, subscribe, because it spoils the enjoyment of the story. But you understand, right? So, go ahead, and subscribe soon. Now let's move on to your stories. Let's move on to another story. How are you, brother? My name is Zakir, and I am from Peshawar. This incident is about my aunt's daughter's 7-year-old son. Her husband has passed away, leaving her with 2 sons, one older and the other a 7-year-old daughter. Her financial condition is somewhat stable, but if not, her younger son collects newspapers and other items to make a living. One day, the boy went out to collect newspapers and found a piece of cloth with blood on it. The 7-year-old picked it up, took it home, and washed and cleaned the bloodstains. After that, a newspaper collector came by, and the boy gave it to him. Little did he know what was going to happen after this. As you know, we Pathans live in a joint family. That night, the child began to scream uncontrollably. The whole family tried to calm him down, but no one could. The next morning, they took him to a doctor, but it didn't help. During the day, he seemed fine, but after Isha's prayer, no one could control him, and he would scream a lot. Whenever my aunt would visit our house, my mother would help her by giving money and food items. My aunt lived about an hour away. As I mentioned, we live in a joint family, so she came to our house to stay for one night. In our tradition, when a woman visits, we vacate a room for her, and the men sleep in the hujra. I was on the train with my cousin when someone came to call me from home. It was 10 p.m. Believe me, Adnan Bhai, even now, I get goosebumps thinking about it. This was the first time I witnessed something like this with a child. His mother called out to him, but he kicked her and screamed. His mother became suspicious that something was wrong with him, so I sat near him. Alhamdulillah, I am a Hafiz of the Quran. When I prayed, I was sitting by his feet, and I told him, "You are a creation of Allah, and we are also creations of Allah. But you are powerless before the Quran and cannot do anything." That's all I said. When his condition improved slightly, I began reciting Surah Al-Jinn and the last 4 surahs of the Quran. Adnan Bhai, believe me, the child became completely relaxed. His mother let go of his hands, and he listened to the Quran peacefully. After I finished reciting, he became very calm. His mother then told me that when he is in such a state, something takes over him and troubles him a lot. She said that a man dressed in white appeared, holding a handkerchief with Allah written on it. The thing that bothers him runs away when it sees this, and then he becomes normal. The one who comes in white is very kind, and the other one runs away after seeing him. His mother also shared that she stays by his side the whole night, sometimes holding his hands, and sometimes his feet. She said she was very exhausted. She asked if I knew anyone who could help. I have a friend who smokes, and he is an imam in a mosque. So, I went to him. When I arrived at his house, his brother came out around midnight. He informed me that the imam had gone to the city. I called him and explained the situation, saying that some guests had come to our house and this was happening to them. I had recited some surahs, so his condition had improved a little. But his mother feared he would be tormented all night, so she asked if I knew anyone who could help. The Imam told me to take 7 black peppers, recite Ayatul Kursi over each one, and then wave them over the boy's head. Once I had completed 7 rounds, I was to throw the peppers into a fire. I did as he instructed, and when I returned home, the boy was in the same condition, screaming. I began the ritual with the peppers, and eventually, he became completely normal. The next morning, his mother told me that after I left, he didn't have any more episodes and slept peacefully. They later took him to several people for spiritual help. A person named Ilm told them that the cloth the boy had picked up had been cursed with black magic, which was why he had been experiencing these incidents. But now the child is fine, and even wears a talisman for protection. That was my story, brother. If you liked it, please share it. Allah Hafiz. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Let's move on to another story. My name is Subhan, and I am 17 years old. This incident happened when I was with my 9-year-old cousin during the winter holidays. We had planned to visit our village during the school break. My cousin and I were both fond of adventure, so we decided that one evening we would visit a nearby tomb located deep in the forest. We reached the tomb around evening time, just as the sun was about to set. The forest was quite deserted, with other graves nearby and a very large tree standing there. As you might know, city kids love climbing trees and playing in the mud. After climbing the tree, I noticed some papers wrapped in a plastic bag. I called out to my cousin and told him about it. He immediately tore it open. At that time, we didn't know anything about magic or such things, but we saw that there were some Quranic verses written on the papers, Na'uzu billah, written upside down. We got scared, so I took the talisman from my cousin, threw it away, and we ran straight back home. We had forgotten about the incident until around 11 p.m. My cousin and I, along with 3 of our relatives, were sitting around a fire, talking, when suddenly, the gate outside started banging loudly. We were terrified, wondering who could be there at this hour. When my cousin went to open the door, no one was outside. Then, he saw a man in the fields nearby, cutting grass and putting it into a loader. My cousin called out to him, but he didn't respond. So, he went closer and touched the man, calling out to him again. You wouldn't believe how terrifying the scene was. When the man turned around, my cousin saw that he had no face, just like those mannequins in malls. My cousin immediately ran away, but he was so frightened that, as he ran, he tripped over a stone and fell, hitting his head. He somehow made it home, drenched in blood, and as soon as he reached, he collapsed and lost consciousness. We were all terrified and called the entire family. They rushed to help and laid him down on a bed. He had a very high fever, and the next day, we took him to the hospital. He wasn't regaining consciousness, and his condition was getting worse. My uncle told everyone to go home while he and my uncle stayed at the hospital. Everyone was upset and exhausted. When we returned from the hospital, it was 9 p.m. Everyone had eaten, and my mother asked me to sleep. I was so tired that I didn't even realize when I fell asleep. Well, at midnight, I suddenly woke up and began screaming. In my sleep, I went to the roof of the house and then started walking outside towards the same tomb. My older cousin was awake and saw me. He called out, but I was still asleep and couldn't hear him. I was completely unconscious. He ran after me, and as soon as he shook me, I collapsed. He picked me up and asked where I was going. I didn't remember anything, brother. I have a sleepwalking disorder, and this was the first time something like this had happened to me. My cousin was still unconscious, so I went home and told everyone about our visit to the tomb and what had happened there. Then my uncle called the local imam, and when I told him the whole story, he said that by picking up those talismans, we had brought the curse upon ourselves, and it wouldn't go away easily. The imam began reciting prayers, and gradually, my cousin regained consciousness, and everything returned to normal. This was the incident that happened to us, and I hope you will share it on your channel. Let's move on to another story. I am a big fan of yours and listen to all your stories. Many incidents have happened to me, but I want to share with you something that happened recently. I am from Sindh, and my house is very old. It was built by my grandfather. Over time, our area has deteriorated, and the house has also started to show signs of wear and tear. The place is getting damaged bit by bit. Because of disputes among our uncles, aunts, and other family members, we cannot sell the house or even renovate it. So, we are just living in it and getting by. My father had 5 brothers, but 4 of them have passed away, and only 1 brother is still alive. Our property is vast, and disputes over it keep happening. Some family members have even resorted to using talismans and other means. For months ago, my father passed away, and 14 to 15 minutes before that, my mother also passed away. My father lived in the front portion of the house, while we stayed on the other side. After my grandmother's death, the portion where my father lived came to us as our share. But our family members were not willing to give us this place. So my father said that since it was not included in the division, they would stay there. Then, strange things began happening, possibly due to the talismans and such. I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but this is what I have been told. My mother remained very ill and eventually passed away. Then, my father also became ill in the same way and died. After that, I started experiencing problems. About 10 to 15 days before Ramadan, I fell into a deep depression. My father's business had completely collapsed. I often prayed to Tahajjud at night. The room where my father used to live was closed after his death. One night, after I finished praying Tahajjud, I went to this room. I heard my father's voice calling me, asking me to take him to the washroom. After finishing my prayer, I started hearing these voices again. My wife, son, and I were lying down, so I said, "Wali Sahib." But he had passed away. How could I hear his voice? I ignored the voice that night. The next day, the same thing happened, around the same time, between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. After I finished my prayer, I wrapped up and lay down. When I sat on the bed, I heard the voice again, asking me to come quickly, to open the door, to take him to the washroom. I became more and more worried because when my father was ill during his last days, he was so weak that for 4 or 5 days, we had to carry him to the washroom and then back to his bed. When I went to the room, I saw that the door was open, and the lock was undone. As I was about to close the door, suddenly, something kicked me in the stomach. I stood up in shock, opened the lock, and looked into the room. To my horror, I saw my father lying on the cot in front of me, covered in a shroud. I didn't feel scared, but I was shocked to see the person I had buried with my own hands 4 months ago now lying before me. I took a step back, and then I heard a voice saying, "I will take you with me." Quickly, I closed the door and returned to my room, reciting Darud Sharif. The next day, I told the entire story to my brother and others. They took me to a Maulvi, who told me that Muslims do not return after death. He said this was the effect of black magic cast on us. He also explained that when I was having a child, my parents were alive, and this was the same magic that had affected them. Now it is affecting me, too. This was my story. It might not be very scary, but it is true. Please pray that my situation improves. Moving forward to another story, I am very fond of you. I am a big fan of your channel and have been following it for a long time. I've been thinking for a while that I should share my story with you. Today, I finally have the time, so I am sharing it now. I live in the buffer zone in Karachi, and I am 19 years old. In 2023, my health suddenly started deteriorating. I experienced a lot of pain in my kidneys, but I ignored it at first. The pain, however, became unbearable, and I eventually broke down in tears. When I told my family, they suggested that I should rest, thinking that it was due to irregular eating habits. But soon, I began to feel pain in my heart, as if someone was inserting a needle into it. I went to the doctor, but nothing was found. Then one night, I was sleeping at home when the power went out. Suddenly, I felt like someone had come and sat near my head. I turned on my mobile's light, but no one was there. I was a little scared, so I recited Ayatul Kursi and went back to sleep. Since that night, strange things started happening to me. Even when I was alone, I didn't feel alone. When I was sleeping, something would not let me rest. Sometimes it would pull me down by my feet, and other times, it would sit on my chest, causing harm in some way or another. I told my family about what was happening, but they dismissed it, saying I was probably imagining things because I listened to horror stories all day and night. They thought I was just being delusional and ignored my concerns. On the morning of August 14th, after watching the fireworks, I came home, lay in bed, and started using my mobile. Suddenly, I began vomiting blood, and it was extremely difficult to stop. My sister was due to deliver a baby that same day, so my father quickly took me to the doctor. They put me on a drip to stop the bleeding. The doctor suggested further tests at Obasi Shaheed Hospital, but everything came back normal. The doctor was baffled and couldn't figure out what was wrong, so he advised me to go to the hospital for more thorough tests. Despite the bleeding, no disease was detected. Every night as I kept visiting the doctor, I started seeing a black shadow that would laugh at me. Sometimes I would see it above my wardrobe, and other times it would harass me near the gate. My weight, which was 55 kilograms, dropped to 40 kilograms due to the constant blood vomiting. One day, while I was on the terrace using my mobile, I heard someone crying. At first, I thought it was coming from the neighboring house, but the sound became so loud that it seemed as if someone was crying right in front of me. When I got scared, the crying turned into laughter. As I ran downstairs, something pushed me from behind, causing me to fall. My family took me to the doctor again, and the next day, we went to get the reports. My parents and I were relieved when the report came back clear. Then a doctor suggested we try spiritual healing to find out what was going on. The next day, my family spoke to the imam of the mosque. He came to our home, recited Quranic verses over me, and after he finished, he spit on me. That night, nothing happened, no crying, no shadows, nothing. The next day, the Qari Sahib told us that someone had done very bad black magic on me. My family members were skeptical, but the imam insisted and asked them to bring me to him. When I sat near the imam, he read more Quranic verses, and suddenly, the entity that was sent to harm me took control of me. When the imam asked who had sent it, the entity responded that it was one of our relatives. The imam then told it to leave me, but the entity refused, saying it wouldn't leave until it had killed me. The imam continued reciting, and I began screaming before eventually falling unconscious. The imam then said that the entity wasn't going to leave easily, so he made a talisman for me and instructed me to wear it at all times. The day the imam gave me the talisman, that very night, the fan in my room suddenly switched off. I gathered the courage to turn it back on, but then I heard a voice outside my room. The door opened, and when I looked back, I saw 3 black shadows standing there. As soon as I started running, blood began pouring from my mouth again. The shadows were laughing. At that moment, I knew my situation was dire. If my heart had been weak, I might have died that very night, but Allah saved me.